time. Also, just to make sure everyone signs on, because there's always a lot to say.
So I'll start with just a little update on news since our last meeting, and then we can have a little discussion with the representative from, you said CB11?
Yes.
And then we can go on from there.
Sounds good.
What do you know is their name by any chance? Just so I can make sure.
Xavier Santiago.
Xavier Santiago. Okay.
I just spoke to him a half an hour ago, so I know he's planning to join.
Okay.
And I heard from some of the other boards that they were unable to, as I mentioned. So, but since people still seem to be signing on, let's just wait another minute or so, and then we'll ask you, I guess, to start with your introduction.
Yeah, sure.
To the ways of the board. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Xavier is here.
Okay. Still give it another minute or so, because just in the last 30 seconds, I think 3 people joined. I'll just also ask if the phone number 914 ending in 738 is someone on the community board, and could you switch that to an identifying name?
We are. It's already being taken care of.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Will.
And it's not a board member.
Okay. Say the word, Craig, whenever you're ready. I'll leave it to you.
I think we can get started, and you can do a little welcome, and then Zachary can let everyone know the procedures.
Sounds good.
It's all yours.
Perfect. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except committee co-chairs Alita Camp and Craig Lader and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, not the wave or thumbs up buttons. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you are on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participant section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me. I'm here for support.
Thank you, Zachary. I guess, Craig, if you don't mind, before you get started, I just would like to introduce Xavier, if that's all right, who is...
No, that's fine. I was just going to introduce us.
Oh, okay. Go ahead then first.
All right. I'll give a formal introduction. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is it's still January 31st, 2022 meeting of the Congestion Pricing Task Force of Community Board 8 Manhattan. My name is Craig Lader. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Alita Camp. And I guess, Alita, you want to start off by introducing one of our peers from Community Board 11.
I do. Xavier Santiago is co-chair of one of the committees on Community Board 11, and I think the first vice chair, if I have that correct. But Craig and I had thought it would be useful to invite people from the surrounding community boards on the border of the zone, and CB11, which Xavier is a member of, is just to our north. So we thought it would be good to hear their point of view and to share our perspective. So that's why we had invited them. And I know that Xavier has some information he'd like to share with us, but why don't we have the update that Craig will provide first, and then we could start on our discussion of the issues, some of the issues. And
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Alita. So as we typically do, I just like to make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of where we are regarding the status of congestion pricing and any news related to congestion pricing in New York and progress in terms of the implementation process. So since our last meeting, really the only thing of note, and it's somewhat important, has to do with the Governor Hochul's proposed 2022 executive budget. So in the budget, it includes an amendment to the theft of services law, which is essentially the fair evasion law for public transportation. And the budget proposes adding language to make it illegal to not pay any fee assessed on any toll, highway, parkway, road, bridge, or tunnel, or to enter or remain in the tolled central business district. So this is specific to congestion pricing. According to Streets blog, where I found the best synopsis of it, this would mean that toll evasion could be prosecuted as a violation, a Class A misdemeanor or Class E felony, which are punished by fines or, in the case of felony convictions, prison. Also proposed is a change to the state's vehicle and traffic law to make it explicitly illegal to drive through a toll with a defaced or illegible license plate. There is already language in the law that makes defaced license plates illegal, but this specifies evading tolls with defaced or illegible license plates as illegal, as an illegal enforcement mechanism when congestion pricing starts. And sidebar, I was once an unfortunate victim where I was driving a relative's vehicle and they had one of those rims around the license plate that identifies where the vehicle was purchased. And I was pulled over, had no reason why. And they said it was because my license plate was obscured and those were illegal in the city. I had no idea that that was the case. This was probably 4 years ago or so, but I think this is clearly related to that, and looking forward to congestion pricing. In the new law would read as such, combining this: it shall be unlawful for any person to operate, drive, or park a motor vehicle on a toll highway, parkway, road, bridge, and or tunnel facility, or to enter or remain in the tolled central business district. If a number plate is not easily readable, nor shall any plate be covered by glass or plastic material, and shall not be knowingly covered or coated with any artificial or synthetic material or substance that conceals or obscures such number plates, or that distorts the recorded or photographic images of such number plates. Violating the new paragraph triggers a fine of $100 to $500. And then finally, the executive budget proposal also makes it illegal for any vehicle to register, re-register, renew, replace, or transfer vehicle registrations if the vehicle identification number is attached to a registration that's been suspended, or if a tolling authority has requested an unpaid toll or fine block be placed on the registration. So this will, again, is a mechanism to help enforce congestion pricing once it is in effect. So that's the real update I have. And obviously the budget hasn't been approved yet, but that's what's been proposed. And last time we had proposals in the budget, it was actually for the congestion pricing law itself. And that was the mechanism used to get congestion pricing into the law. So we'll see what happens, but that's where this is quite possibly headed.
I just want to add, even though it's not directly relevant, that Governor Hochul has nominated a couple of people to the MTA board including Elizabeth Velez, who is, I don't have the article right in front of me, but I believe that she was asked about congestion pricing, and I believe that she said community input should be considered. So again, it's an opportunity for us, hopefully, to be able to weigh in and be a little bit more proactive with that. And I don't have anything else on that. There's someone else she nominated, but he's been acting as interim director. So that's not so much news. So before we begin our discussion, I guess I just would like to ask if Xavier has anything he'd like to share with us. I understand that he lived in London while the congestion pricing scheme after it was enacted, and may have some information. Otherwise, I see that Michelle from the board has her hand raised. So
Is
I
it okay
guess-
to speak, Alita?
Yeah, sure, and hi.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say hi. Thank you so much for the invitation. For those that I'm not acquainted with, I'm the current chair of Community Board 11. I just started my term January 1st.
I didn't know. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I served as vice chair of Community Board 11 for 4 years. I've known Alita for some time. Craig, I think you and I have had phone calls. Haven't had the opportunity to meet, but hey, no better time than now.
This is meeting on here.
Yeah, hey, there you go. So I'd like to listen in, and then I'll chime in towards once I've heard everyone speak. That's how I tend to take things I observe. I did live in London there for about a little over 3 years. I experienced their congestion pricing model, their tube model, and how they ran everything under their transport authority. And I really will weigh in after I've heard a little bit of the feedback and interchange. I do think that as we consider everything, it's in the totality and holistic care of the community. I can say that CB11 has had multiple conversations on these type of issues, and we have not taken a weighted position one way or another in this particular issue, but I can tell you what those conversations held. And then from my personal experience, and share with that, if that is okay with your committee, your task force.
Yeah. That's fine. If you don't mind, I think we'd all be interested in hearing just what those conversations within CB11 were, and the general, obviously haven't taken a position, but what the sentiments were, if there seemed to be consensus or lack of consensus, which I'm guessing is the case. I'm sure there are very diverse sets of opinions there, and just if there are concerns, what those concerns are within your community, so we can, obviously we've as a task force met numerous times, and we have a good sense of where, not, I don't want to say the task force stands or even the board stands, but we had the same issues with various viewpoints being represented. But I think there are certain themes that we all tend to think need to be addressed.
Yeah, so well, thank you. Again, I don't always defer to the existing community board members, and I appreciate the ability to speak in advance. And I apologize if you hear my little one. I have two. One has already been excused from the dining table, and so if you hear the other one, I apologize. I think when it comes to congestion pricing, I think we're dealing with not quite a singular, but a very unique circumstance as it comes to how it would be applied in this city, because we are dealing with both inter and intrastate commuting. We have people coming in from New Jersey using the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel, and George Washington Bridge. As you know, you have people coming from Connecticut, Westchester County, the outer boroughs into our community. What we have had in our experience, and this has been heightened during the pandemic, has been commuters from out of the state, out of New York County or Manhattan, who would park here in our community and then take public transport down. Now what we're finding is that there's been a heightened desire for those parking spots within our community, and we also have a lot of people who reverse commute for their jobs. And there's been a bit of ire, if you will, and from both the public and during our discussions about how do we handle this. Taking that and having that conversation, we've discussed resident parking permits, which is a model that you will find in other European cities. where, say, for London, where I lived, and Notting Hill Gate, you had those sections where you paid every year to have a parking permit and allowed you to park in that area. If you went into, say, city center, like central London, you paid that congestion pricing. Now, we have the pandemic, which is a larger issue we've been all dealing with. And we have found that we discovered between last year and the summer of 2020, WhatsApp groups from people who were switching shifts with businesses in the community and a lot of our local providers on highest employers in the community, where people would say, I'm leaving shift, someone wants to take my spot, it's over here. And a lot of the locals got very incensed over that. Now, that has reactivated that conversation about how that would then play a part in congestion pricing, what and how applicable the model would be long term. Look, I'm a big supporter of public transport. I take it everywhere, even during the pandemic, wearing my N95. During all of the surges and from the beginning, I do think that we have to take the right measured steps. But our biggest concern, I think, is how would it apply to our Manhattanites, and then how that would apply to our boroughs of Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Bronx, and then New Jersey, Connecticut, Westchester County, and how that dovetails as a collective impact on our structure. Now, keep in mind, and I'm very general, when living there, I would have a parking permit for the neighborhood I lived in. If I went to an outside neighborhood, I would have to pay at one of the muni meters, their equivalent of a muni meter, on side street, side street parking, like down the avenues, if you will. They're not a grid plan like we are. If I went into central London, I, of course, paid the congestion pricing. The difference is that they just have the Thames. We have multiple bodies of water. So I think in the conversations, like I look at, I think some of the conversations that have occurred have been, how will this impact our local businesses, such as our local livery cab services that have existed for several decades? How will that impact our older, retirees, and because they require and rely on assisted transport? So these are the questions that are being mulled over, if you will. And I think that ultimately we would desire, and again, I'm going to push our Public Safety and Transportation Committee Chair, Jose, to take a more measured and embraced approach with your task force, if you'll have it. But if we don't take anything less than a careful and considered holistic approach, we stand to apply a model that may not be tenable long term. I can tell you from my experience that having a resident parking permit worked really well. It dissuaded a lot of people from just driving all over the city. And I think that's something that I think long term could be workable within a congestion pricing model. But I'm open to everyone's thoughts, and that's kind of the quick brain dump, if you will, as they say in the UK. So.
Oh, thank you for that.
I guess,
No,
I
go
don't
on,
know.
go on.
What do you think about opening it up to a discussion that we were talking about? We could start with exemptions. I just want to mention that I was doing some research this morning, and I just happened to read that London was really the closest model that we were looking for before I had connected with Xavier, and learned that they are feeling that their congestion pricing zone is becoming a little bit outdated, and it's not doing enough to curtail congestion, I believe. So they are looking at a measurement based on either road usage or the amount of pollutants emitted by a vehicle, something other than congestion pricing, with a much broader zone, maybe city border to city border. I know we haven't looked at any of other issues because we are trying to react and actually be proactive with respect to congestion pricing, and be able to have input into the rulemaking of the Transit Mobility Review Board. And Xavier, for your information, we've already sent in a resolution, as I mentioned, asking for two members from Manhattan, one north of 60th Street and one below 60th Street, to be on the Transit Mobility Review Board. But we've been having a continuing discussion of potential exemptions and other, I guess, discounts from the toll. I think it's well known. There's been a lot of discussion in Albany about people coming in and through Port Authority means the bridge, the George Washington Bridge and the tunnels. And I guess that would apply. Does that apply also to the Tappan Zee? And being exempt from congestion pricing as they drive into the city. So that won't, the congestion pricing then won't impact the traffic coming in from the west of us because they'll have already paid and they won't have to pay anymore, is my thinking.
And the Tappan Zee is actually different because it's administered by the New York State Thruway Authority as opposed to the Port Authority.
So we don't know if they'll be exempt or not.
Right. Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that yet. But being that the New York State Thruway Authority is a New York State agency, it's not the MTA, but it is New York State.
Right, it's New York State. So yet another different geographical entity administering transportation, but that's okay. I haven't seen anything about it either. So, so shall we open it up to discussion?
Sure, let's do it.
So is there anyone from the public who has any comments? And Xavier, if you would like to add anything else, just raise your virtual hand. Anyone from the public before we go to Michelle from the board? Okay, well, the public is always able to raise their hand. So I see B. Gal, I can't read it, I'm sorry. And someone else, and Evelyn. So let's go to, I'm sure you'll fill us in on your first name, B.
It's Boaz Galil, thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I've been living in Upper East Side since 2012. I've been all over the world. And actually congestion pricing and traffic in cities, something that it's an interesting subject in economy. I can tell you from what my research is that, let's start with the beginning. There is no alternative. I mean, lots of people don't like it, because you look at this as another tax, and specifically here in New York City, where we are paying already premium. And sometimes, specifically these days, you're asking, what are we getting for all the tax that we are paying? But there is no better alternative. It's a limit, the roads, the parking, it's a limited resource. So until the technology will be there, like autonomous cars, we're talking about, I don't know, maybe in 10 years from now, there is no other alternative. The problem, now why we don't see it widely used, the congestion in cities around the world, is because it's not popular. You'll see it even when it's, I guess when the city will start talking about it. First of all, everyone will want, okay, I need exemption, I need that exemption, and then you start managing the exemption, and then there is corruption and so on, and making things a bit harder. And the second thing is, the public look at this as additional tax, but it's not. It's actually there is already a tax when you are sitting in traffic, right? When you are in the bus and the bus is stuck in traffic, there is already a tax of your time. So that's my 2 cents. The only thing about the previous gentleman that talked about the public transportation, I just want to say one word about public transportation, that New York City, despite the fact that, the subway system, the bus system, and so on, specifically the subway is built, I don't know, 100 years ago. I'm not talking about the new Q trains. It's super efficient, specific for those of us that lives in Upper East Side. It's like, I've never been in such an area where the public transportation is such efficient. However, specifically in the last 2 years, the specific subway is becoming very dangerous in certain lines. And I've been joining the community board discussions in different, I haven't been in a discussion where people are talking about public safety. But for example, I can tell you that I don't know if people are using the Q line during the night or the 6 train. If I compare it to, I don't know, 10 years ago when I used the 6 and today, it's like there are certain hours that I will prefer not to use the subway. That's it. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Okay, there are a couple more people from the public, so let's have Evelyn David and then Phil Kogan. Evelyn?
Oh, good evening. I first want to say thank you for your compliment about my number 1738, my board member. That was funny and nice, and thank you. I feel like I'm one, but not really. Anyway, I know you do so much work for, just, but I'm highly interested, and I really do try to keep, I'm actively watching the website and paying attention and trying to raise issues. So the first thing, to Xavier, thank you very much for your comments. Your very, very, very pertinent points. And, there are things, the congestion zone is going to be a very small zone, actually. And I don't want it to be any bigger. I'm not saying that. It's just that we feel so targeted. It was such a big issue and putting so much on one particular part of Manhattan for people that drive. And I don't know. I don't know if it's fair. I still haven't decided. I don't know if it'll do any good. I still think they should have municipal parking lots in the outer boroughs. That would solve many problems. Having said all of that, somebody made a comment about driving all over the city. I don't know who does that. For fun? No, I don't know. Maybe 1 car, 2 cars? No, I don't know. So I don't know about that comment. There's something else that I wanted to kind of bring up. People are going to be penalized if they're actually, it's against the law in reading the New York State law to have license plates that are illegible. And it suddenly brought to mind the bicycles that have no licenses, right? To break all kinds of rules. So anybody that doesn't pay the toll, I guess it'll be the same as if you go through a toll bridge, you're going to get fined. If you go through the Manhattan, Washington, George Washington Bridge and you don't pay, it'll be the same structure. I'm sure they'll make it like that. But having a license plate, but hopefully they will get the news out to have people get their license plates so they're renewed if they have to. There are many things popping up here that are worrisome. And anyway, I'll leave it at that. But thank you, Xavier, for being there and bringing issues to the core for you think the parking is going to be bad where you are. Just wait till Manhattan, right where we are in the 60s. It's going to be unbelievably horrible. Anyway, okay, thank you very much. We'll continue on with the meeting and see what other comments come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Before we go to Phil, I have a question for Craig. Do you know how they will treat cars from other states that may not have Easy Pass? Because I do see cars in Manhattan from other states. I don't know if they have Easy Passes. Some states have their own system. Florida has its own system, or it did when I was there. So I don't know. Do you have any idea? And also in other states, apparently, they can have things that cover up their license plates, because I've always wondered how you're supposed to distinguish a state when the state name is covered by some kind of decorative border.
Right. I believe it would be done almost certainly toll by plates. And New York already does that for all the bridges and tunnels and on the New York State Thruway where they've taken down the toll barriers. Any vehicle from anywhere will just go through it and they'll get a photo of the plate and they'll be able to tie it back to vehicle registration. So the mechanisms are already in place to do that. Just with Easy Pass, we all are familiar with the physical responder that people have. And I believe that there are surcharges for those who pay by plate at MTA bridges and tunnels and on the Thruway, as opposed to Easy Pass. And that I don't know if there would be such policies with congestion pricing. If it would be more expensive for people that would be toll by plate or not.
I know that Madison Avenue bid for one raised the issue of aesthetics of whatever is reading the license plates. Are the mechanisms for reading plates larger than for reading easy passes? Are they different? Do you know anything about them?
I believe it's the same mechanism. I think if you've ever crossed the bridge and seen the overhead stanchions where they take the photos and you get the flashes, I think that's what they're doing. They're taking photos of all the vehicles and they're tying back the vehicles that don't have Easy Pass to their, or I don't know if they're tying it back to the databases, but that's how they're literally capturing the vehicles so they can assess the tolls by mail.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then let's go to Phil.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity for holding this this meeting on Zoom. I know there's a lot that hasn't been determined about the rules and the process that will be implemented if this goes to fruition. My question is, do vehicles that remain in the congestion pricing zone, for example, overnight, will they be charged differently? Will they be charged for each day they're in the congestion pricing zone? I ask because I live in the 70s, but I garage my car on 29th Street. So I would live outside the zone, but my car lives inside the zone. What's going to happen as far as my vehicle and what I will pay?
I think from what I read, they are tolling people who live within the zone whose cars are there. So I imagine they're more concerned about where your car lives than where you live, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But even for residents who don't use their cars and garage them within the zone, they'll be tolled somehow. Is that right, Craig?
My understanding is that drivers who live within the congestion zone would not pay when they drive within the zone or when they leave it, but when they return. That's according to an article I just pulled up, and that's what I remember hearing about. I don't know if that policy is finalized and official or if that is subject to change, but that at least was, I think, how it was framed in the original law.
I read a poster that the MTA put up about congestion pricing, and they talked about people remaining, cars remaining within the zone. So maybe it's an area that we need more clarity on. And I think you and I had talked about it. So I don't know, maybe it is just when they're coming back. It seems like a heavy burden for people who live there and their cars, but certainly the language in the MTA's own advertising was that people remaining within the zone will be told.
People remaining within the zone will be told.
But I don't know. I mean, from what Craig said now, that could be a misinterpretation, or they could have adapted and changed it recently. That was several months ago. So I don't know. I certainly wouldn't take it as gospel.
Yeah, what I just read came from an article in the New York Times immediately after the agreement was made in 2019 for the budget deal. So I'm trying to see if I could find something more recent than that, but I think that was the original language or the original intent as it was understood.
Well, while we're doing research, why don't we go to Xavier?
Hey, so real quick, I don't want to jump as they say in the UK, jump the queue. I thank you for the comments. I think looking at this, and again, I'm looking long term, how is this going to impact our city? No different than, say, when Robert Moses raised entire neighborhoods to create the transport corridors that we have now. I think we Again, I think if we're not looking at this in a holistic fashion, and I think when you neighborhood by neighborhood, right? So you would have this, if you can imagine where the zone is, and after looking at the website and the proposed zoning, I think that, take for example, I broke my ankle Memorial Day weekend. My podiatrist used to be up here in the neighborhood on 97th Street in the Mount Sinai complex. Moved all the way downtown, okay, towards Bleecker Street. Say I was not in a capacity with crutches to be able to get there. How is that going to impact people who are invalid or have mobility issues and require transportation, whether through Uber or traditional cab? I think this is a question that I raise because a lot of the members of our community here in East Harlem have mobility issues. They have transport issues. And back to my further point with the reverse commute, we have a lot of members of our community who are commuting to their jobs outside now. Say how many people within that zone are facing the same circumstances. And I think to the prior speaker, he's raising a point. He houses his car at a garage for whatever reason outside of where he lives. There's nothing to begrudge. They can be for any variety of reasons. How is that going to impact long term? And I think because again, I do think we are on a track, and especially if it gets pushed through, like what happened last year, how do we actually navigate that path to where it's successful in deterring vehicular traffic without impacting local commerce? And again, there's some people that are forced to drive; they have to drive. There are others who prefer public transport, like myself. There are those that would have. Perhaps you have people in your community district who do require reverse commuting. So these are questions I have that we should take under consideration because, again, as we evolve, we're different than, say, London, and because that's a country, that's a city, where we have our city, our state, and then another state next door, which we require on employees from that state. And another point about our to the first speaker raised his hand with our public transportation. I love our MTA subway network. Love it. It's one of the oldest in the world. I had the benefit of, while studying abroad and doing Y2K work, for those who remember what that was like. The whole like, oh, clock's going to turn 2000 and the world's going to end. I lived in Tokyo during that time, and that system over there, both with public transportation and parking and everything, was a very efficient model, and it may be worth exploring with this as well. So I could try to dig up some information from that time and what it is now. That'll be of help.
David, if you don't mind me asking, you mentioned before that there seems to be a sense that there are people that are coming into CB11 and then parking and then using public transportation. Do you know who is generally doing this, like the profile of it? Are these people who are trying to park in CB11 because it is less expensive than parking in a garage in Midtown? Because I find it just as a transportation planner, it goes against the concept that in general people tend to make travel decisions based on convenience and obviously price, but there is generally it's not widely practiced where people will switch modes intentionally short of a destination and then take all this additional time. Now, granted, some people may also feel like if traffic is a nightmare in Midtown, that it's beneficial for them to ditch their cars further north and then take the subway because their trips will be faster and they bypass a lot of the traffic, which congestion pricing is aiming to mitigate. But I think all evidence that we've learned about in terms of our district points to the fact that it is highly unlikely that anyone who currently drives into what's now the congestion zone is going to try to park in the already congested Upper East Side and pay to park here just to lengthen their trip by then switching to the subway to complete their trip.
And thank you for raising that point. I appreciate that. I would say from firsthand experience that I've seen within a 5-block radius of where I live, and I'm on 102nd, right between Lex and Park. We have seen an uptick. We have seen people from outside of not just our district, but outside of the city do exactly that. And I think that we would see a knock-on effect, a ripple effect happen. And I can tell you this right now because I witnessed firsthand fights break out with locals versus people who are from outside of the city. So again, because this is a district that it's probably the lowest rung socioeconomically speaking, which is something we are working hard to change. There are people who take advantage of that because then you can either get 125th Street or you can just jump to 6 and you're a quick transfer to 86 to take the express train. And I've been able to make it in record time all the way down to the financial district, taking that transit option. But we have seen that, and we have seen an uptick, and this community has experienced that. And I would say like a majority of Upper Manhattan has experienced that, and even more so, doubly, if not triply so during COVID. Would that impact to CB8? I can't say, but I can tell you what we have witnessed currently and what we have observed. And so, yes, from your position representing CB8, and this is again, this is in a collegial sense, I can see your point of view clearly. I can tell you what has happened in our community. And even on our block right here today, I saw bickering because obviously there's less space because of the snow. People arguing who are coming into work at Mount Sinai, and we thank our frontline workers for getting us through after 2 years of the pandemic. I'm very thankful having lost several family members and family members who are also frontline workers. I saw bickering today because they're like, I have to make my shift. I have to get there. And the local's like, I was parking here. So this has been a reality we've been facing for years. So that is what I could say. And again, I'm not weighing in on whether we're in favor or not of congestion pricing. What I'm trying to be very clear about is that there is a ripple effect that happens throughout all the communities around that central portion where it is being applied. And my personal position, not the board's position, is that if we were to apply a neighborhood parking permit plan or some kind of model of that sort, you would have a more efficient model being applied throughout the city, where you're prioritizing those who live in those community districts. And then that would incentivize others to say either engage in public transport or to think about how they transit throughout our metropolis. I hope that's helpful.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have, I guess, Michael Tenenbaum is the last public speaker for now. Michael? And Michael's wife, maybe? You're muted. Wait, hang on. We can't hear you, but it doesn't look like you're muted, Zachary.
Yeah,
There you
they're
go.
muted now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. I think what you're doing is fabulous. I live on 94th Street and 2nd Avenue. The building's 35 years old. And we used to live in Port Jefferson, exit 64 on the LIE. I invite you all to go look there. The resident parking, like Xavier said, is fabulous. The resident parking permits. Number 2, the ripple effect. We're going to see it in spades here. People will park on our streets. Is there any way? I've been almost run over once every other week by a bike. So I would really like to see the strips of those Citibank bikes being removed. They're on 93rd Street. And we've got the Westwood School there. And those bikes are always there. They're not really used. So to open up the space.
Yeah, why do they need bikes? People can walk.
So that's my 3 cents. And
All right.
by the way, we did have a Zoom with Julie Menon this week, and she also understood how terrible the queue line has become and dangerous. So she's going to try and get the MTA to correct that. I would invite everybody to reach out to Julie Menon. She's fantastic.
Thank you. Okay, we can't do anything about the bikes. That's Transportation Committee, which Craig is also co-chair of, but we understand about the space and about having availability for people who may be looking to park.
We'll be talking bikes on Wednesday.
Thank you. I know there's definitely an overlap. Before we go to the board, if everyone would bear with me, I just found this from the city .nyc on who will have to pay in the congestion zone. So it says the exemptions are emergency vehicles, vehicles transporting people with disabilities, and any vehicle belonging to families living inside the Manhattan congestion pricing zone in which the household earns $60,000 or less per year. So that suggests that people living within the zone who earn more than $60,000 would have to pay, I guess, just by thinking about that sentence in reverse. So and this article was from, or this information was from September of 2021. So I don't know, we should certainly get clarity on that, but that's what I found just very quickly now. Are we ready to go to the board, Craig?
I believe so. I'll just say, since I know that the idea of residential parking permits has come up, it has come up in this committee, in this task force in the past. And not to suggest that anything is going to happen, but the new DOT commissioner, Donis Rodriguez, is one who is supportive of residential parking permits, or has supported it in the past. So there may be some friendliness towards the policy in City Hall. Not clear, and I don't know that there have been any official discussions that have been had, but it is an interesting development for those who do have an interest in it.
It has come up a few times, so maybe that's worth a separate, lengthier or more detailed discussion. Michelle, you've been really patient. Zachary, would you unmute Michelle? I say that because I know you had your hand up from the very beginning.
I did. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Xavier, because your comments are valuable. And I just want to say I applaud your board for not having a resolution on this issue. It was way too early, in my opinion, to formulate a resolution because we basically have no information except for the conceptual one. And as a matter of fact, I think that that's unfortunate, and the reason that we don't have many formal updates tonight is because new information does not seem to come out about the details of this project. We have it conceptually for years already, with the first introduction of this concept being during the Bloomberg administration. So this is how many years we're talking about this, and now we assume it will come to pass, but we have no further clarification of the details as this goes on. And I think that the powers that be are remiss in not getting the details out to the public in a very real way, so that we have very real questions, and so that we have the very real ability of making suggestions that could make this thing workable. The other thing is, when you mentioned that first of all, it seems crazy to me that a person would have to pay to return to his home if his home is in the district. That seems to be a very sort of out there kind of a regulation, that you have to return, you have to pay to come home. And by your opening comments, Craig, which is where I had my original question, I think what you read could be interpreted as saying that parking, I mean street parking, I'm assuming not parking garage parking, because they're not really tracking the cars in there, although we don't know, based on the question of our last public person who was concerned about his parking. But it seemed to me from what you read that street parking will be illegal in the whole downtown area.
No,
Because
there is not.
Well, they
there's
didn't
no-
have any concept of saying what they would do if you stayed there. Staying there with a vehicle means you're parking there. So if you can't stay there, unless I misheard, but if you can't stay there, that to me means you can't park there. I'll wait for a minute until you answer that, if you don't mind. I just want to address something else that Xavier said, which I have found to be true empirically all my life. And that is that people routinely park outside a more costly or district and then take other means into the district. This is evidenced all over our adjoining states, where there are public parking areas for residents' vehicles so that they can then take the Jersey Tube into Manhattan, the George Washington Bridge. There's a lot on the other side of the bridge at 168th Street on the Jersey side to park your car, to take the bus across the bridge when people, many New Jerseyans take a car to the bridge, the bus across the bridge, and a subway down to where they're going. And this is true, I believe, all over the country. So I don't think this is an outlier to think that people will park outside and come into the district in a less costly way. And as one of our callers, who always offers good commentary, recommended, would be a municipal parking lot in our out of boroughs, which would be an excellent idea. For example, Queens on the other side of the Queensboro Bridge, Brooklyn, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a very good idea, and I think it would serve our residents well. The other thing I had to take note of and just comment on is there's going to be pretty strict enforcement and penalty within the zone. However, there are no penalties for turnstile jumpers and anybody who beats the fares in our public transportation. So maybe the city wants to go back and revisit that. That's a penalty just as much as beating a toll anywhere else. Getting on public transportation and trying to beat the fare is just as much of a crime and should be treated as such. So anyway, and the other thing, but I'm glad you mentioned it, was the vehicles carrying the disabled, because I was going to ask about Accessoride. And that is a government program, which would mean that the government will be taxing itself on all of those rides that go into the district, which many will, because the hospitals, I mean, we on the Upper East Side, most of our hospitals are above 59th, but there are a load of hospitals all throughout the district. And I have no doubt that Accessoride and all the para-ambulate facilities are carrying people who are patients or disabled to those locations. So that's my comment. And so I'll just go back to Craig. Can you clarify, did I misunderstand about the quote staying in the district versus parking in the district? And thank you all for listening.
So I found another article that was from earlier, or not earlier this year, from September or July, it was from July of 2021, that again said that residents of the district won't be charged while driving within the zone, just when re-entering it. And again, that may very well be because they don't plan on inundating the toll zone with congestion pricing infrastructure, that they're only going to be putting it at locations where people would enter or exit the zone. So they wouldn't have a means of being able to record all the internal movement within the zone. So that, I think, is why this seems to be the case. And I should dig into the RFP that was published that resulted in a vendor being used for the infrastructure that is going to be implemented, because it probably has details that could confirm that. In terms of what the new law would read, again, it says, it shall be unlawful for any person to operate, drive, or park a motor vehicle on a toll highway, parkway, road, bridge, and or tunnel facility, or to enter or remain in the tolled central business district if such a number plate is not easily readable, nor shall, so it's readable. So it's talking about the license plate itself. And then in terms of the fare evasion law comparison, it would add language to make it illegal to not pay any fee assessed on any toll, highway, parkway, road, bridge, or tunnel, or to enter or remain within the tolled central district. But that's, I think, referring to for someone who doesn't pay the toll. So just like fare evasion, as long as you pay to enter, pay the fare, you're following the rules. No one's going to penalize you for anything. Same thing with this. I think they're trying to make sure that people don't blatantly break the laws and decide they're going to be scofflaws by not paying the fees that they're assessed, because if they don't have an easy pass that will automatically collect it, they're going to be sent an invoice by mail, and if you don't pay it, there needs to be an enforcement mechanism for that.
And also, Michelle, I think the fare jumpers, one's a question of enforcement and whether they're going to enforce it and how, or what kinds of penalties there will be. So here we're looking at a lot of numbers, high numbers. I know that they add up, but I think one's enforcement and one is just having the law in place to begin with. And I guess we'll see what happens, because I think there have been varying views of enforcement of the laws against fare beaters over turnstiles or into buses.
That's a whole other debate that I think we want to avoid here.
We're not tackling that, but Michelle raised the equality between the two situations, and whether if they're charging for cars or they're making sure that people don't skip the tolls, should they do the same thing? But yes, it's another entirely conversation, I think more appropriate for your other committee. So with that, let's go to Ed Hartzog. Ed, hi.
Thanks, Alita. Thanks, Craig. I think this is my first congestion pricing task force meeting. So this is all I've been very interested in the topic. And just sort of like a question Michelle had in the speaker before that. So it's a Monday night, so it's a perfect night. My son practices hockey across the river in LIC on Monday and Wednesdays when we're not in pandemic mode. But so for tonight, like my wife, she just took my son to hockey practice. But now we live on 72. We take the 59th Street Bridge to just pop over Queens Boulevard to like 32nd Place, drop them off at the rink, loop around, come right back over the bridge and come home. And so I'm unclear, because I do see the infrastructure going in on the bridge, which always bothered me that this was going in while we're in pandemic mode. But my question is, do we get popped for doing that twice, for basically going down, and we garage the car? So just as a quick side note, just calling on my micro and macroeconomics from graduate school days, there will be a ripple effect, yes, that has been raised, and people like myself who garage their cars, I'm sure we'll see an attendant price increase with the demand for parking. But my question is, do I get popped just for going 3 blocks down York Avenue to 57 so I can get on the upper roadway? Because I do understand the public policy, public administration thinking behind why we're doing this. You know, we're not going down into the Midtown. I'm staying on the fringe and going over. So I was just wondering, the people like myself who use the bridge to go over and back just for that purpose, do we get popped twice on what I've heard in rumors to be $22 a pop every time you go in and out of this zone?
Come on.
I was just going to say that the plan right now is to charge people once per day, no matter how many times you pop in and out of the zone. The other thing is that you won't get charged coming east from the bridge from Queens into Manhattan, because you could just exit onto the FDR Drive, or you are north if you get off at 63rd Street, that's north of the zone. On the other hand, though, going back over the bridge, because you will be below 60th Street to get onto the bridge going out to Queens, that you will be in the zone and charged once for that. But I have a question for you. What do you mean the infrastructure going on the bridge now?
Well, it looks like something's happening on the 59th Street Bridge. And just as a quick aside, and Craig, maybe this is for transportation, but I do find it quite just congestion creation. They've put these, they look like, I guess, I don't, the definition, I don't know, they call it gantry or whatever it is. Those readers look like they've been already put in up top on the upper roadway, or at least the infrastructure to hang something up there to read license plates on the bridge. Looks like it's going in, or I don't understand why they're putting steel plates on the roadway. And the other thing is, it's a little, I'll just say, Craig, maybe for later in the week, incredibly annoying and not good for traffic flow on a personal level, is they've put these barriers, these orange plastic barriers like they used to have on 72nd here at 3rd Avenue till all the cabs ran them down, and they didn't put them up anymore, to separate the traffic. So you can't change lanes going over the bridge. So when those poor guys are taking their carts over the bridge at 5 o'clock at rush hour, and they're going 10 miles an hour, you can't change lanes to try to speed up traffic flow. The traffic is boxed into the lanes for most of the way over the bridge. So that's what I mean, the infrastructure. Something's going on up on the bridge. Something's happening up there.
Well, those barriers seem to be a transportation committee thing. You're right.
Yeah, sorry.
But tolling the bridge, I understand, Craig, and correct me if I'm wrong, or anybody correct me, is that that's not part of the plan, or that's not, it's something that we've discussed, is whether that makes more sense to toll the bridge than to have a 60th Street barrier over there. But from what I understand, that's not part of the plan. I don't know. Maybe this is something different. What do you know, Craig?
That's one of the top questions that we've had that we have not been able to get an answer to. The language of the law specifically states that the and according to the MTA presentations from the first round of public meetings back in September and October, they were very clear that the congestion pricing zone is inclusive of 60th Street. They have not specified what that means in terms of the bridge, but it may very well mean that the bridge is going to be included within it. There are exemptions for those people who are traveling through Manhattan, but they have not specified that that would include the bridge, and it would create an inequity if you had a situation where some people were going to try to access the upper level where they would have to cross south of 60th Street, while others who would be coming across 60th Street or coming south on 2nd Avenue would be able to access the upper level directly. Again, it has to do with where they place the gantries. But I think one of the things as a committee that we may wish to comment on at some point is how we're going to address this Queensboro Bridge issue specifically, because it could be that there are policy benefits to saying all bridge traffic should be tolled, because if not, it could create traffic nightmares here with people changing the manner in which they behave as drivers in terms of how they are trying to access or exit the bridge. So that's one of the, we need guidance on that. We need to understand what the policy is proposed to be before we can say, oh, we think this is going to be something we need to address. That's essentially where we are right now.
Well, what are they doing on the bridge now?
Well, right now they're replacing the upper bridge deck. This is a long established project that is just part of their normal maintenance and rehabilitation. So they're replacing the bridge deck of the upper level. So it's going to be, I forget the length of the project, but there are different stages of it. There are going to be at times lane closures and such. But we have information up, I believe, on our website. I know I saw emails about it today that I didn't get to open, but it's a precursor to it was going to happen anyway, and then eventually they're going to be working to convert the South Outer roadway to
Right.
the bike pedestrian
Right.
usage.
It
But
just sounded,
before they do that, I think they needed to do more work on the bridge deck.
it sounded
although-
as though Ed was describing something different, but maybe not.
I don't know.
Anything else, Ed?
No, that was it. I just, like I said, I was just curious, and I just saw that work going on, and sorry to be cynical, but I just figured this is a great way for the MTA to slip it right past us while we were all, looking over here, and then back over here, they're slipping in the gantries on the bridge, and then the legislature passes the tolls, and it's up and it's going, and boom, we got the money, and off we go to the races. That was my worry.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
we can't
Sorry to
help
be
you sleep better
Sorry
at
to be
night.
paranoid.
Sorry, no sleeping better from this committee. Sharon?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay. First of all, thank you, Alita, and thank you, Craig, so much. And really appreciate your work on this. I have a couple of questions for Xavier Santiago. I don't know if he's still on the call.
I see that he is.
He is.
Oh, okay. All right. Fantastic. First of all, I wanted to thank you so much for joining and participating in this Community Board 8 meeting. I just can imagine what another meeting does to your schedule. The two questions that I wanted to ask you, I wanted to know whether or not your community board has also sent a letter to the Traffic Mobility Review Board requesting representation from Community Board 8 and also Community Board 11. So I was just interested in finding out about that. And I also wanted to find out logistically, how is congestion pricing being handled at Community Board 11? So for Community Board 8, we have a separate task force, and Craig is also the chairperson of Transportation Committee, but he is chairing separately this congestion task force. I wanted to know whether or not congestion pricing is under transportation. Well, of course, it's going to be under transportation, but is there any discussion about having a separate task force?
So thank you. Thank you for being here and being engaged. That's first off, because a lot of people don't get plugged in, and now it's easier than ever. I will have to double check our records to see if, with the mobility and transportation, to see if any letters been sent. I'm still combing over multitudes of documents. I'll dig into that and find out.
Can imagine.
We all know our current borough president, Mark Levine. He and I used to speak on the regular, and now it's like I have to put up the bat signal. What I can tell you right now is there's a lot to absorb, and so I'll do that, and then Alita and Craig have my info thing. Get back to me. I can circle back on that one issue. Second, public safety and transportation handles all of these issues that deal with congestion pricing, et cetera, and so on. I do recall, if memory serves me well, when we had the issue with 96th Street and that divide and having to cross over back and forth, a lot of people were quite upset about that, of having to pay that surcharge when you're only going a handful of blocks. And now we're seeing that extend now through your community district. We're undertaking a variety of issues, and they have their meeting tomorrow. I'm going to have a conversation with the chair of that committee to say this is something we need to keep on our radar and start assessing because of the long-term impact, as I alluded with, for example, say your podiatrist moves and you're not going to get accessoride, right? I'm not going to get accessoride. I don't qualify. So that means I got to pay out of pocket additionally to go see my doctor if I can't get on the subway. So these are questions I have. And again, I'm not weighing in on one side or the other of the argument, but more about, are we asking all the right questions to making a holistic and collective decision, one that weighs out all the scenarios. So I hope that answers it. And one thing, if I could take it aside.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Okay. So the other thing too that was raised previously about bike riding, and again, I'm glad Craig chairs up the issue of bike riding.
Can I just before bike riding, I just wanted to follow up on something that Craig had mentioned. I wanted the board to know that I have looked at parking garages, I would say between 95th Street and 105th Street on the east side. And they are less expensive. You know what, maybe by $5, maybe not that much. But I want you to know that the parking garages are less expensive. It is entirely feasible. And I can absolutely imagine that there would be people who would come into, for example, Community Board 11, park in a garage or even on the street, and then take public transportation downtown. And those garages actually are becoming more crowded as well, which then has the impact of increasing street demand for parking. I'm sorry, Xavier, I just wanted to close that loop.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm forced to have a vehicle because of my vocation and also having a family with 2 kids and 2 dogs, and just no white picket fence because no space. The issue I wanted to address within the meeting, and again, thank you, Craig, thank you, Alita, for allowing me to be here. And everyone hearing on Community Board 8, the culture. We are in the process of changing culture, right? And this is something that I think is important for all of us. And this is, again, take not an official position, but something we've talked about at the board and talked about in the community, is this sense of we compare ourselves, and we do this statistical analysis with how parts of Asia, parts of Europe have dealt with everything. You go to Europe, they dealt with 10 centuries of war before they got to a somewhat civilized society. And I have friends all over Belgium, Bruges, Spain, London, and they all just say, like, yeah, that's why we try to get along. We still bicker. When I talk about bike culture, because again, I love biking, love rollerblading. I'm all about the green resources, assessing it properly so we can transport across the city. However, culturally, and again, as we assess both this component of congestion pricing, street parking, that culture that is part of our city, our lifeline, our heartbeat, the way they handle it in London, the way they handle it in Europe, they obey the laws 9 out of 10 times more than we do here. I had just on our block here, people going in the reverse flow with their bikes on sidewalk and on the street. These are issues. If we can start to change that culture of how we engage with vehicular traffic, whether it is bike traffic, whether it is your standard sedan, we'll be able to move mountains in how we engage with our transit and our commerce. So I think that's just something I wanted to say as an aside, that I thought very deeply on. And again, this is a guy who used to ride his bike, rollerblade in the city until I got hit by cars. I've been knocked over as a pedestrian by a biker twice. And so I think this is, again, as we address congestion pricing, and it's about our culture and about how we assess that and how it gets monetized by the MTA. These are more questions, but I think we should be asking them. And there is what Craig and Lita were talking about was about the creep, what I call the creep. It starts exiting out of the community it's applied and transferring out. And I think that's something this body, as it advises the greater body of Community Board 8, should take under consideration. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to be quiet now and go give my kids a hug. Good night.
Are you coming back?
Yes, I will come back. I'm just going to go off camera and mute for a little bit, but you will be in my ear. So
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Billy?
Hi, I didn't realize I was up next. Sorry about that. And now I have to regain my place. So I think I was going to just say two things. One was, as we were discussing, and Alita, you mentioned earlier, the exemption for people with disabilities in the congestion pricing legislation. I do think it would be good for us to figure out how that relates to what was raised earlier about someone who's going to the doctor's appointment, who's on crutches, et cetera. And I don't yet have the definition. And frankly, I don't know whether the legislation is going by a specific definition for persons with disabilities. But I would wonder whether the legislation and the TMRB at some point may contemplate making it, I suppose, more inclusive and broader than it's typically meant to be. That was my first kind of comment. The second comment was, and I believe Michelle was talking about people who maybe park outside of the congestion zone and then would take the subway or walk in. And I wanted to take a little bit of issue with that because I just think I haven't seen the evidence for it. And this is not a critique of Michelle, but this is sort of for us as a task force. You know, we should try to get to the bottom of what evidence exists for it. And forgive me if I'm just missing it. The one thing I pulled quickly was from our minutes from last month. It says, and this is based on the study that, pardon me, I think it may have been from the study that Replica did. Replica said, parking near the boundary continues to be a concern. However, there's some comfort in Replica's data. It shows of the 34,000 trips that pass through Community District 8 on local streets, only about 2,000 are private vehicles, with a destination between 50th and 60th Streets, east of Fifth Avenue, which is the most likely destination for any vehicle where someone is then going to park and walk. Whether other cars will seek to park and continue to further destinations is unknown. So that's what our minutes say. So I guess I'm wondering, what is the evidence and how can we get better evidence around it? Because I hear you, Michelle. I've certainly heard the concern that this is an unintended consequence we're going to see. But if there isn't strong evidence for it, then we should consider that as well. So that was really just those are the only comments I kind of wanted to make at this time.
Well, I don't know what evidence there is for or against the idea of the ripple effect and people parking. It's really just anecdotal. But in researching London, I saw that there was an exemption for people working at or going to appointments at the National Health Service. So they have private doctors apparently in England, as well as the National Health Service, which is free. I don't know how it works. I don't know anything about income. But they did seem to, from the little bit of research that I did, exempt people going to National Health Service and potentially working there. So that's broader than just the disabilities that get the placards that allow you to park in different places. I don't know what happens if it's something that's temporary, what you have to prove, or if you're going to an appointment. There was someone several months ago who was getting treatment, and I think his mother was getting treatment as well at one of the East River hospitals, whether NYU or New York Presbyterian, who was talking about how difficult taking public transportation is and how being treated at these hospitals is a reason a lot of people come to New York. So the idea, I guess, of exemptions for people going to appointments, are they chronic? Are they acute patients? What kind of treatment are they getting? All of that is, I guess, a fair discussion for exemptions and how do you parse out who should get under the label of disability and who shouldn't. How do you look at it? And I don't think anyone wants to be excluded, and no one is suggesting, but really, what does it mean? And I don't know that it's for us to say, but really to, I guess, issue recommendations or have comments and questions for the board. So that's just what I found in looking at London.
I just want to note something. This relates to a few comments that we had before. So I was just digging into the official language for the congestion pricing law, and I believe it's section 1704 in the 2019 budget bill, and it reads as follows. And I'll point out what I am interpreting from this. The Central Business District tolling program will operate in the Central Business District. The Central Business District shall include any roadways, bridges, tunnels, approaches, or ramps that are located within or enter into the geographic area in the borough of Manhattan south of and inclusive of 60th Street to the extent practicable, but shall not include the FDR Drive and New York State Route 9A, otherwise known as the West Side Highway, including the Battery Park Underpass and any surface roadway portion of the Hugh Carey Tunnel connecting to West Street. The boundaries of the Central Business District shall not be modified, expanded, or reduced, and shall incorporate the outer bounds of the aforementioned district to the extent practicable. So there, I didn't know where we actually saw officially that it talked about inclusive of 60th Street, but that's where it is. And it does refer to all ramps and approaches located within that. And technically the bridge, as we all know, is the 59th Street Bridge. It is between 59th and 60th. It is certainly south of 60th. So logic would have it in that case that the bridge will be tolled because all parts of the bridge and any ramp would be located south of 60th Street. Again, I don't know for a fact, but that is what logic would dictate.
Well, Ed's a lawyer and he's giving you the thumbs up, so I guess that makes sense to him. And it does sound right. To a lawyer, though, the language to the extent practicable is a really good loophole.
Yes, I'm sure it is.
Yeah. I know, Leah, you keep raising your hand and lowering it. Did you want to make a comment? You're a member of the public. Leah, there you go. Can she be unmuted, please, Zachary?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My comments generally were following on to somebody else's, but since I'm here, I find that when we're talking about exemptions and what it's always important to remember that this plan is the congestion pricing plan is not really to reduce traffic in Midtown as much as it is to raise money. And so that kind of puts a different spin on whether it's fair to people who live, in Murray Hill, that they have to pay a toll every time they move their car. The point is to raise money, and that's really what's driving everything here. So I'm sorry, I will leave it at that.
Well, it's interesting that you raise that, because one of the questions that Craig and I were discussing earlier is the idea of a lockbox for the MTA and whether the money going to the MTA will enhance or supplement the budget, or whether it will just be money going to the MTA, freeing up money the MTA already has to go someplace else. So it's a question. We just don't know the mechanics of anything yet. But I guess there are multiple goals, one of which is raising money, one of which is reducing congestion, one of which is saving the environment. So, but it's unknown exactly how the mechanism would work. Ed, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something else? You lowered it, but I don't know if you intended to. Yes? No? Maybe you're not there. Okay. Craig, we heard from a number of people, but we haven't really talked about exemptions to this point, and not to necessarily have a resolution this evening, but I think it would be helpful to identify more specifically the kinds of exemptions that the community might support. What do you think?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I was
it's okay, Ed, you're back. Or here.
Well, I wasn't unmuted before. No, I was just going to say, I was echoing what Craig was saying, not to be a lawyer. You're lawyers too, and Billy is too. I mean, God, you probably have half the people here are lawyers, for God's sakes. I mean, it's nothing, this is no constitutional seminar here. It's just, he read it. It's all the approaches within the district. And I was just going to echo that the bridge is within 60th Street, as Craig pointed out. It's between 59th and 60th. And I would just echo what our previous speaker said about raising revenue. Is, let's not forget, that is one of the main points of this. So that was all. I was just going to say that, yeah, it seems like the bridge is going to be tolled, which is what I was talking about before.
Okay.
All right, I just want to clarify one thing. So regarding the lockbox, the legislation does include language for what's called a central business district tolling capital lockbox, which will be controlled by the Tri-Bow Bridge and Tunnel Authority. The funds can be used for the cost of the tolling program, the 2020 to 2024 capital program, or subsequent capital programs, but cannot be used for the MTA's 2015 to 2019 capital plan because it's now passed. Additionally, legislation states that the funds in the lockbox will supplement, not supplant, city, state, or federal support for the MTA capital program. The legislation requires that 80% of the lockbox funds to support the capital projects of New York City Transit and its subsidiaries, with priority given to the subway system, bus system, and investments in outer borough areas with limited mass transit capital projects. 10% will support capital projects of the Metro North Railroad and 10% for Long Island Railroad. Additionally, the MTA will be required to set aside a yet to be determined amount of its 2020 to 2024 capital program to expand transit availability in areas of New York City and nearby suburbs that currently have limited mass transit options, with details to be delineated in a memorandum of understanding. TBTA can use the revenues in the lockbox to pay for the cost of the tolling program, the capital program, or pledge them to secure bonds to support the tolling program or the capital program. And they may also transfer the funds to the MTA to pay for the capital program or debt service on the capital plan. So that's how the lockbox works.
So a possibility is to use the funds to pay for the program to raise the funds.
That could be part of it, I suppose. Yeah. So I was actually going to suggest, just because I think we've discussed to some degree exemptions before. I wonder if it would make sense for people to submit comments and to think about it. I'm not sure whether having a discussion now is going to lead us anywhere, and that we're going to have anything new that comes up based off of or beyond what's been discussed in the past. So I know we've talked in the past about things related to the Queensboro Bridge, which may be a non-issue, regarding the issue of people briefly crossing into the zone because they're forced into the zone, whether it be due to construction or whether it be for because of alternate side parking, where they're briefly in it and coming out of it. And I think we have talked about the possibility of mechanisms to ensure that someone that inadvertently is there or very temporarily is there isn't assessed a fee. Something regarding protecting small businesses that are located in or around the zone, or those people that have garages that are in or near the boundary. We've talked about the question of offsets that go beyond this community, whether there should be offsets for people crossing non-MTA bridges and tunnels, i.e. we talked about earlier, the Port Authority bridges and tunnels, the Holland, Lincoln, and George Washington Bridge and the Tappan Zee Bridge operated by the New York State Thruway. In the past, there have been discussions regarding motorcycles and such. So that's our list, and I'm wondering whether it makes sense for us to put on an agenda each of these topics for, say, the next meeting, and we can obtain feedback on potential thoughts regarding it. And it could be that people don't want exemptions for some of these policies. And of course, I think we've, as discussed before tonight, certain medical exemptions beyond what's already stipulated in the legislation. So that's what I think could be beneficial, but I don't know. I'm open to discussing it more. I just don't want to take a lot of time doing it if we're not sure if we're going to be able to have a lot of movement on it.
Well, I think it's important to have some kind of resolution or a consensus so that we could write a letter if we want to have input. But I'm also wondering, and again, and I didn't realize this, but back to London for a moment, they exempt taxis, but not for hire car vehicles, or not Uber and Lyft specifically. And I'm wondering if that's something that's worth a discussion, is whether taxis should be in a different category. What they found recently, and one of the reasons I think that they're thinking of revising their plan, is that although the congestion from cars has decreased, the actual pollution has increased because of congestion from diesel vehicles. So again, it's ripple effects, it's unknown or unintended consequences, but at least maybe in terms of taxis versus Uber/Lyft, it's worth having a discussion tonight or next time. But I do think we should have something in writing that we could send up to Albany, so that voices are heard.
Yeah, well, we already have our policy or our recommendation regarding yellow taxis.
That was, I thought, to get rid of the fare from 96th Street, the double congestion pricing fee. But I didn't realize.
You're suggesting eliminating all fees into the zone, not the surcharge.
I'm just wondering if that's something that people, I don't have an opinion on that. I don't know, but that's something that they've done in London. I don't know how people feel. I know that there's a lot of concern about the future of taxi cabs versus Uber and Lyft. And they are treated differently there. So I was just opening it up for a discussion, but I thought our resolution did have to do with basically the double fee that we're paying below 96th Street to get in a cab. I know Michelle's had her hand raised. She's even resorted to raising her physical hand. So why don't we go to Michelle and we could ponder this one.
Yeah, ponder it. Yeah, thanks, Alita. I just wanted to say that for us, this is a relatively early meeting. And I don't think it would be harmful if we took another half hour to have some kind of a lightning round. Just those of us who are, everybody here throwing out a suggestion, mainly for the record and so that it appears in the minutes. I don't think it has to be thoroughly examined. And I would like to make a point that I would not like to see a resolution. I think we're far too quick to jump on resolutions. Things change. This is still, while it may be a fait accompli, as I said before, the details are still out there somewhere, and we may want to change a position later on. I don't think we need a resolution, but if we had it in our minutes, at least it's on the record that numbers 1 through 10 were thrown out as suggestions. It's a way for us to keep track of it. And since it's early enough in the evening, I think with a quick lightning round, we probably could do this within the next half hour. And then it's perfectly legitimate for it to be on the agenda for another meeting for discussion. I wouldn't want to see it submitted in writing, because then the rest of the committee, not only the committee, the rest of the people on the call don't have an opportunity to see it. Whereas if they took the trouble to be on the call tonight, at least they're here to hear it. So that would be my recommendation.
I wasn't suggesting something in writing tonight, but I meant a resolution in writing that is something formal going at some point when it's
Yes,
ready.
but not,
going-
yeah, but that, sure, I think that's how we do things is with
Right.
resolutions, so I
Right.
agree. I just don't want to see a premature one, and I think one tonight would be very premature. I think we have a little bit of time.
No, I was agreeing with Craig that
Yeah.
we not do that tonight, but that we do something.
Right, but I
general.
would like to see something in the minutes and on the records reflecting the people who are on the call tonight, reflecting people's thoughts about what could be under consideration. So I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Let's go to Judy Schneider from the public. Judy?
Hi, all. The conversation has been most interesting. Alita, I agree with your last point. And I think cabs should be given some leeway and help. They've had the yellow taxi cab business, as we all know, has had a really hard time in New York City with the Ubers and the Lyfts and the other companies. And I think if it were up to me, I'd certainly make an exception for yellow cabs.
Thank you, Judy. Let's go to Billy.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something about the yellow cabs, and maybe I don't know, maybe this is referring to Ubers and Lyfts, but looking at the legislation that was introduced in January 2019, which eventually became incorporated in the governor's budget, there was a section that said no owner of a for-hire vehicle that is subject to a surcharge imposed by Article 29C, et cetera, shall be charged a congestion toll. So I just want to understand, and I don't know if it ended up in the final text, but was the idea that for for-hire vehicles like Ubers and Lyfts, were they exempted from congestion pricing in some way, but yellow cabs were not? Because I'd love to get an understanding of that before, better understanding whether, we should be pushing to widen the exemption or if it's already covered in the law.
I don't remember anything specific regarding for-hire vehicles, especially in terms of exemptions, but I would need to look back and see.
Well, it's possible that it was taken out because, again, I think I'm looking at something that was dated January 15th. And so there were amendments in the Senate and Assembly. And then eventually there was, I think, the final amendments in the governor's executive budget. So it may have dropped out, and I'm looking at something outdated, but perhaps it's something we can figure out ahead of our next meeting.
It does strike me as very unfair to exempt Uber and Lyft and not the taxis. So I don't know, especially because we've been, especially for the reasons that you articulated, Billy, but also we've been paying this extra fare that we've had plenty of comments on at board meetings, at transportation committee meetings about the unfairness of that extra fee below 96th Street. Craig, I'm sorry.
No, I was just trying to do a search through the bill. There's something here. The board shall recommend a plan for credits, discounts, and/or exemptions for tolls paid on bridges and crossings, which shall be informed by a traffic study associated with the impact of any such credits. We've discussed that before. Discounts and/or exemptions on the recommended toll. The board shall recommend a plan for credits, discounts, and/or exemptions for hire vehicles defined and subject to a surcharge imposed by Article 29C of the tax law for a for-hire transportation trip based on factors but not limited to initial market entry cost associated with licensing and regulation, comparative contribution to congestion in the central business district, and general industry impacts. The board shall produce a detailed report that provides information regarding the board's review and analysis for purposes of establishing its recommendations. I think that was just in general. So there could be, I guess, I think what this is referring to is not that they're going to be providing discounts or exemptions necessarily, but they're looking at it and assessing the impact of it. Although I think it would be, if the policy was that there was only going to be a once per day charge, then it would probably be moot because it would treat vehicles the same way, unless they were to penalize vehicles that were coming in and out multiple times. I don't know. I'm now just speculating. I should probably not.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that would, defeat the purpose a little bit. If you're only charging like an Uber once per day, then it's effectively saying Uber would not be.
Yeah. And there is some, and there is something here, and we've discussed this in the past as well, that beginning 1 year after the operation date and every 2 years thereafter, the TBTA, in consultation with NYC-DOT, shall report on the effect of the central business tolling program on traffic congestion in and around the central business district, and on mass transit use and taxi and for-hire vehicle use, including the vehicle miles traveled for each trip within the central business district for taxis and for-hire vehicles. So I think they are looking to assess how specifically what the impacts are on for-hire vehicles.
Got it.
But again, I thought that was alluding to how the impacts of tolling on them, but I'm not entirely clear if it's that or the impacts of or the impacts that on congestion that they may cause.
Well, that's what I was wondering, is if one of those unintended consequences of not having cars going into the zone is having more Ubers and Lyfts in the zone, circling around the zone, circling around the perimeter of the zone, more people using their own cars as Ubers and Lyfts to make money from the people who are no longer driving into the zone and paying the toll. So I don't know. And it would be interesting, I suppose, if there was a mechanism to calculate, but how could that be calculated in advance? So I don't really know. I guess a concern might be these unintended consequences, the impact, and whether they are, I suppose, if they're looking for information and reevaluating it every year or every 2 years, whether there will be a mechanism to alter the mechanics of it, the logistics of it. But I guess that's neither here nor there. So, Craig? I think Boz, is that right? Has his hand up again?
Yes.
So,
so just a small comment. So this is exactly the problem with exemptions. Once you had exemptions, you now need the expert get into the rules, who get exemption, and then you have all those, corner cases. So this is why I'm, again, my personally opinion is that congestion is very good specifically for a city, a mega city like New York City. The roads, the parking are limited, so there should be a tax on it. Depends on the usage, on the time of the hour. Let's say that, I don't know, now it's a peak hour, it should actually increase. During off hours, it should decrease. It should be dynamic, something dynamic. They are doing it actually, I don't know what they are doing in London, but they are doing it in Israel. Basically, it's a dynamically calculated based on peak hours, off-peak hours. And it shouldn't have any exemption. Now, once you don't have any exemptions, the people, the taxi, the car sharing companies, that's their business. So eventually they will have to pay, and they will eventually push this tax on the people that will use the taxi and the car sharing. And the good news is that then the public transportation, the buses, so on, will have much available space in the road and can get from point A to point B much faster. Now, that should be the like phase 0. The phase 1, once you start reducing the number of cars from the streets, and you have those, all the situation that people are, specifically around, people that need to get to the hospital, you can start thinking about shuttles, to the hospital, and that's again what I've seen that they are doing to other cities. But I heard someone mention that congestion is, it's basically just a tax to increase, to get more money for the city, and so maybe that's the main reason to do that. But actually, I think in the long run, we will all enjoy it. I mean, yeah, that's it for my end.
Thank you. So maybe Craig, to add on the list is timing of it. Holidays, weekends, nighttime, rush hour, middle of the day, or should anything be changed for any of that? So,
right. And that's almost an entirely separate discussion. It's still within the purview of the Traffic Mobility Review Board, but that's not discounts, credits, exemptions, and offsets that I think we've been talking about there. I think there's a separate set of policies that's related to the actual costs that they're going to establish for it, and what the hours are going to be in terms of the variability of the tolls based on time of day.
right. Well, our agenda is broader than just exemptions, but that's okay. Just as long as we have, as long as we're sending, I guess, the points of view of the public and the board members, any other interested party stakeholders to Albany at some point before they start enacting. It doesn't matter to me anyway, the order in which we do things. I just want to make sure that we cover all of them.
Of course.
So if we could go to Phil again, Michelle, thanks to your patience, member of the public. Phil, go ahead.
Just wanted to make one comment about exemptions. We have to take into consideration the impact of exemptions or lack of exemptions on nonprofits. I myself am a volunteer with the American Red Cross. The headquarters is located within the congestion pricing zone. Red Cross dispatches vehicles an average of 12 to 14 times a day to fires in the city. If the Red Cross is not exempted, it's going, and it does that 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and 24 hours a day. Any money that goes to paying congestion pricing tolls is going to affect the bottom line and the ability of the Red Cross to respond. There are food collection nonprofits. There are all kinds of nonprofits that operate in and out of the congestion pricing zone that right now have no exemption, and their bottom line will be affected. That means the community, all of us, will be affected. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yes, thanks, Alita. I think Phil's point is excellent, and I think that should be written down as a consideration. I just have a question. Well, let me say about assessing the situation every year or 2 years. They certainly will, because it will be, if it's not preventing enough congestion, the only way they're going to solve it is they're going to keep raising the fee. And that, in fact, is what they did in London. I think the fee's been raised 3 or more times, and that's going to be the way it's controlled. We had an interesting thing here years ago when the DOT was trying to put muni meters in that changed based on the time of day. And a few of us were involved in working on that. And what they found was when the cost of the muni meter to a privately owned vehicle, I'm not talking about commercial meters, was very high during the main part of the shopping day. And the fact is that it did not reduce use of the parking spot, but actually the committee decided it was actually punitive. And the point was not to make it punitive, but to make it so that there was enough turnover with the parking meters so that, you know, the stores and everybody had a chance. We did this study on 86th Street. And the board was really against it becoming punitive. But it was very interesting that even though during the main shopping hours, the tolls were very high, it didn't decrease the amount of usage. I just wanted to throw that out there. But what I really wanted to ask, and this to me is really an important question. If you want to exempt somebody going, say, for a series of unfortunate chemotherapy treatments at Memorial, which now involves, you know, weekly or monthly visits, whatever it is, how exactly do you determine what each person in each car, where they're going and why they're going there? I mean, that you talk about an invasion of privacy. I think that is way up there. So even if we want to do that, how? Does anybody have any idea how something like that isn't necessarily a chronic problem? Some people, as you know, as Xavier said, had a broken ankle. Some, you know, it's not necessarily chronic, but it's acute enough to cause a change in your life and the necessity for frequent visits to doctors or hospitals within the zone. How exactly do we determine that? What kind of a process can you see in place that would permit you to determine such a thing? I'm interested to hear it. I don't poo-poo it. I just want to know. As a matter of fact, I think it's a good idea, but I don't understand how you can possibly have that information without invasion of privacy or some, because you, at the very least, if your car weren't going to be stopped, which would be the ultimate invasion of privacy, let's say you would have to call in to a central bureau to say, I have this chronic problem and I have to go to this visit. I mean, any way you slice it, it's quite the invasion. Does anybody here, can anybody here conceive of a process by which this could make sense?
I think you have a very valid point there, and I think that's the reason why the legislation was written the way that it was, because there are limitations that exist that would preclude any entity from being able to really target certain types of drivers for exemptions without it becoming an invasion of privacy or without it having to require some sort of registration or identification of a specific reason why someone should be exempted from it. I think that's why they talk about those that have tags for accessible parking as those who would be exempted from it. But obviously there's a much broader population that from the standpoint of what's right and fair, that perhaps should be potentially eligible for it. But how do you do it without getting into other more serious issues regarding
I mean, people's circumstances change on a weekly basis, and it's sort of scary to think that you would be reporting these changes to whoever or whatever, even though, as we discuss it, it seems like a fair idea. In other words, people who wouldn't ordinarily go in and out of the zone, and now all of a sudden they're going in and out on a frequent basis. But I can't conceive of a fair way to allow that, or a fair way to even implement that. I can't see how it could be done without it being a breach of almost everything we as a country believe in. So it's a little on the problematic side, to say the least. Sorry, Alita, you wanted to say.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Michelle. It is problematic, and it does have, it certainly implicates privacy issues, but having lived in LA, where you pay for parking and driving all the time, they have validations. And maybe if you go for something at a facility. There's just a general stamp on a ticket that you're validated, and you send that in. They don't ask you why you're there. It doesn't say what department. It doesn't give you anything specific. It could be a broken ankle. I mean, yeah, Memorial Sloan Kettering is clearly about something, but New York Presbyterian, Langone, those places are not. It could be a broken ankle. It could be a limp. It could be chemotherapy. It could be surgery, and they don't need to know. There could be just something like that. But otherwise, it does raise huge issues about privacy and invasion, plus violation of federal HIPAA laws and all of that. But yet the idea that people go for treatment and shouldn't have to pay an additional fee for something like that, it's not voluntary, ought to be, in my opinion, I'll just, as I guess, step out as co-chair, there should be some kind of way to recognize that and deal with it, because the idea, I guess, is to be fair and not penalize and not overly tax.
Right.
So, and those people can't necessarily help it, because there's plenty of reasons why people can't use public transportation, much less ride a bicycle under certain health circumstances.
But you see, you get into, I think that's about the only way that it could be done. And I think that's a very, very good idea. But you would have to also open up not only the hospitals, people going for physical therapy, and wherever people go. Does the government have a right to know where you're going and when you're going? I suppose if they're giving you something, they do. In other words, if they're giving you, if they're exempting you from a fee, and you have to have a reason, and that fee is the law, with the exception of your reason, then yes, then I guess they have the right. But I can think of so many circumstances of places where people, need to go for whatever reason. And that validation system off the top of my head is probably the only thing that could work, but it would have to be expanded to lots of different facilities. You could be going to your speech therapist in a private office in the zone. You could be going to your podiatrist. It doesn't necessarily have to be something of angst. And yet it is it's something required for your well-being and health. And so you would have to broaden this, you'd have to give a lot of entities the ability to give an exemption. It wouldn't just be the major hospitals and those corridors. It would be pretty broad-based, but could be done, could be taken under consideration for sure. So I think it's good that that gets on our list, whatever, list in quotation marks, whatever, but at least it's all on the record, which is what I wanted for tonight, and any other ideas like this. So thanks a lot.
And I think I want to just be clear that the law itself only refers to emergency vehicles that are carrying people with disabilities. And I think it actually says authorized vehicles. No qualifying authorized emergency vehicle as defined pursuant to Section 100 of this chapter, or a qualifying vehicle transporting a person with disabilities shall be charged a central business district toll. I don't know what it means by a qualifying vehicle transporting a person with disabilities, if that refers to a vehicle that is registered with the state or the city to allow for accessible parking. But it's, I guess, a good question that we have, in how to and how we could theoretically expand that if we chose to.
Well, I just want to also thank Phil, because the idea of not-for-profits that really can help New Yorkers, and again, there are lines and considerations, but that wasn't something that I had or that we had really necessarily thought about. With respect to exemptions and discounts, I guess a threshold question is whether the idea of exemptions and discounts, and I forgot the other category, is something that we support or none at all. I know that there are pro biking groups that support no exemptions whatsoever, and expanding the zone. So I think, well, first we need to address that. But even and that's not necessarily for tonight either, but before we go down any direction, Leah has her hand raised again. So Zachary, could you unmute her, please?
Yes, before I get to my point, this is what I was suggesting before, badly, in that I never thought that the congestion pricing plan was about fairness and who should fairly be exempted, because it really always has been about raising money for the MTA. We've had discussions in this committee before about the fact that the more exemptions you have, the more you have to increase the toll for the remaining people. So I think fairness is good, but I don't think that this was ever a plan that was designed to be fair. But while I'm talking about overarching things that we could put on the list, there's the pandemic and the fact that Midtown is not what it used to be, and things have changed a lot in every possible way. But the plan has the congestion, except for the congestion pricing plan, that has not changed. So it seems crazy to me that we would be having a congestion pricing plan based on pre-pandemic patterns. Maybe 2 years from now, we'll all be so desperate to save Midtown that we won't want there to be any congestion plan at all. I don't know what the future will bring, but it's certainly not going to be the same as 2019.
I think your point is well taken. It's just that the congestion pricing plan looks like it's moving forward. The governor seems to support it. Other elected officials seem to support it. We have the, if not blessing, at least the inherent approval of the Biden administration. So I don't know that people are thinking about the changes in Manhattan and throughout the city, even transportation, to rely on the usage of cars now as the same. It may not be 2019, but it also may not be 2020 or 2021 once we figure out either how to live with this virus or it recedes. So it raises some questions about timing, but I'm not sure that it makes any sense to spend time on it because it looks like it's just going forward. So maybe the best thing to do is to try and make the best of the situation and have as much input as we could. Okay, let's since Craig is silent on that, let's go to back to Boz and then Michelle.
Yes, just one comment about the Midtown. So again, I don't know exactly what will be the final congestion law. Again, I'm pro congestion law, but the question, and I hope once they will add it, it will be dynamic flexibility and based on survey, meaning that talking about the Midtown. So I'm with you 100%. The Midtown situation right now, it's a disaster. It's impacting the Upper East Side as well, but that's a different story. But if there will not be a traffic, so let's assume that in some kind of a scenario where there is no traffic in Midtown, then there is no congestion, right? I mean, the congestion should come in, tax should come in only when in a situation where there is a traffic. Let's say that on January, Monday mornings, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., there was a traffic, high traffic. Then next month on February, there will be a congestion on those hours. That's how it works. That's how the law should work. And again, once you get into the corner of all those exemption, basically you get to the same situation as, and this is basic to respond to Michelle. If you're talking about all those loopholes, exemptions, and so on, of course they can implement it. And you know where you can see it implemented? In the tax. Today I'm starting to do the tax for previous year. It's crazy because you have all those loopholes, and every other country other than the US, the tax is very, very simple. But once you add all those if statement else and this, you get to a very, very complicated scenario. And then you need those special people that will help you fill up the taxes and so on. The law should be, in my opinion, always very simple, straightforward. And
Are you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Are you aware of any place that has congestion pricing where the fees are that fluid that they look at them in January and then base them, the February ones on January, and then do they look at March on February? Because congestion may be very different in the peaks of the tourist season here,
exactly.
where people are driving in the spring and summer and early fall, as opposed to the winter or maybe even the heat of August. I don't know.
So
you know where that changes like that?
Yes. So first of all, congestion, I mean, all those mega cities have started to look into it before the COVID-19. COVID-19 is basically, it's a game changer. And basically all the cities are now, okay. I mean, this is the walking of the dead. But one city implemented, Tel Aviv in Israel, they are doing those survey. And it's, and now basically the decisions are going to roll back out of it because of those exemptions. A lot of, they started to get the same issues that Michelle mentioned, that, okay, there is those people want exemption, those people want exemption, everyone, oh, you got exemption, what about me? And then basically say, you know what? So they are now starting to think, again about maybe to stop the toll bridges based on congestion, because they are saying that rich people are, basically it's not a big deal for them, and it's pushing all the poor people to the public transportation. That is not good. This is not good like in New York City. The public transportation in Israel, one of the challenge, what's the problem in Israel? There is no good public transportation in New York City, except for the public safety, and basically I think that's amazing public transportation. And that's it for my end.
Thank you. And it's certainly the goal to keep having amazing public transportation. And back to Michelle.
Thanks again, Alita. First of all, Boz, you make excellent points. The reasoning is all there, no question. It is possible that if you had no exemptions, you would have more people using it. And if you had more going into the zone, and if you had more people going into the zone, that might conceivably lower the price so that it becomes affordable for most. That's possible. We don't know that that's going to happen because we don't know a lot about this. Nobody seems to know a lot about this, even the powers that be, which is why we're not getting a lot of information. But another thing we could do, I'm just putting this out there because we're taking minutes and we're having suggestions, is what they do on highways with the where a car goes in that special, what is it, a something OV lane, if they have more than one passenger in it, something like that, which maybe can then allow private cars, because I don't really see why cars for hire, which are taking people who, if they have cars, would only be using their own car, if the car for hire is charged once a day, they maybe chalk it back. Well, if they're in and out of the zone all day, I guess they get the bargain of the century. But if a person with a privately owned vehicle wants to go into the zone, which means they're not using that car for hire or a taxi, they get penalized. Well, how about giving them a benefit if they have more than one person in the car? For example, a family that has to go in, not so easy to take the carriage and the diaper bag and 2 kids and wherever you're going to a park midtown, you might want to have your own transport, whatever. These are all hypothetical and theoretical, but I'm just saying that that could be a way to level the playing field with those who have private vehicles. And again, if we have no exemptions, because there is consideration that we usually give to people with extra needs, and to eliminate that here, or to not consider that here, would only be understandable if the fees could be reduced so that it would be affordable to most people. And by that I mean down to the fare of public transportation, like $2.75, or for seniors, what is it, half of that? So a consideration like that, I think, could make sense, in which you don't have to give other considerations. But some kind of consideration, no matter how it's given, I think needs to be considered. And certainly for the nonprofits as well. Thanks
The other thing
again.
about LA was that people would get in trouble for getting plastic dolls and putting them in the passenger seat so they could ride in the HOV lanes.
I have no doubt
That
that
happens here
people
also.
are very, very resourceful, and there is always a way to get around the situation. If we even attempted to plan for that, we'd be here forever. So we can't account for that.
But the problem with that, I believe, is that that those are not assessed. It's not automated that anyone who is found to be breaking the law of the HOV lanes, or really just if you're pulled over or somehow otherwise captured, because I don't know that cameras can capture if there's someone in the driver's seat and then there's someone in the back seats. That's still 2 people. A baby could be a second person. But
Right.
in terms of congestion pricing, there's going to be no real mechanism, because it's not as if NYPD is going to pull people over as they're crossing into the zone. It's
Understood. I also had one other point. I was just tossing that out there if they wanted to build such an infrastructure. The other thing is, I contend that bicycles should have to pay this fee, which of course they can't be identified unless they're licensed, which of course that's a subject for another day, and that other day may even be Wednesday. So, but I'm throwing that out there, that there are enough cycle riders, electric or non-electric, 2-wheelers or not, big or little, whatever that whole category is, there are enough of them where they, no question, add to the congestion on the street. And where possible, they too, maybe the fee isn't as much, like on the tolls over the bridges. The heavier vehicles pay more, the lighter vehicles pay less. You know, with electronics and computers these days, you can program almost anything into what they are planning to do. But I think that should definitely, I think cycles, I'll say cycles, should be under consideration to be included in this plan, no question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Craig, how should we work with the potential of exemptions? Should we just go through, draw up minutes, and then have a further discussion next time? Ask for input from the public in the email blasts that go out from the board, and then include that in a list? How do you want to handle this? Because I'm sure with all the people, there's a different opinion from everybody.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to compile. I think we can try to put together a list of suggestions that I think are realistic. I have to disagree with Michelle. I think we're getting off topic if we start trying to assess fees on cyclists. I think we need to focus on the primary targets of the congestion pricing zone. But beyond that, I think even if things are would be very challenging at best in terms of some of the exemptions we talked about and figuring out how they could work. I think it's only fair to have that discussion where we can bring them up and try to brainstorm and see if there are ideas that people have that could perhaps be agreed upon to some extent, or just be further formulated.
Well, you may be right that bicycles are unrealistic, but there was a call among people several months ago for motorcycles.
Well, motorcycles. So yeah, I think motorcycles. I think there are definitely, that's fair game, because there are two different schools of thought there. That motorcycles, some people believe that they should be exempted. Some people believe that they shouldn't. That they should be treated as actual vehicles. Then there's that gray area of mopeds that are pseudo motorcycles, but not really. They're a different class of vehicles, and I think that can get very sticky. But I think anything, if we're talking about just normal pedal bicycles, pedal assisted e-bikes, where we don't have any mechanism for any tracking right now, we shouldn't even get into that. If there were ever a day where there was some sort of official licensing or registration of them, that could be addressed going forward. But I think we need to stick to what we know can be tracked and enforced at this point.
Well, what about those bicycles that pull little mini flatbed trucks behind them with groceries or packages? Those can't go, or maybe, I don't know, maybe should they go into bike lanes, or if they're in traffic lanes, do they impede traffic? Do they contribute to congestion?
You're referring to cargo bikes, and cargo bikes are intended to reduce congestion because they're intended to be a substitute for truck deliveries that are taking place. So I don't see that being a realistic target, because the intent of them is to actually address some of the congestion issues that take place, because of it enables trucks to not have to be on the road, double park, do their loading and unloading. And it's also relatively new. So I think we're all learning to see what the impacts of them are. Right now, they're relatively small because there just aren't that many out there, but that actually may very well be the wave of the future.
Well, at least they don't double park.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely worth. I think we should compile this running list, and not to say that we're shutting it off. And if anyone has any suggestions that they want to suggest going forward, they could be emailed to one of us offline or communicated to the board office and passed along to us. And then when we have our next meeting, we can put something together and list them, and they would be worthy of additional discussion.
Maybe we should post them as is without surrounding minutes, just as a list on the website. So
we could have a link to a list on a separate page. I think it would overwhelm an agenda, but just like we do where we have documents that are linked to on the agendas as they're sent out, we could do that as well.
Yeah, and then people may see them and it may spin off some other ideas. Let's unmute Ed.
I had a question for you, Craig. On those cargo bikes that Michelle was talking about, you were talking about, those like yellow, they got like the yellow things behind them. And so, but did I hear you correctly? You said there's no trucks involved, but I look out my window at 72nd and 3rd, late at night, we have a grocery store in the corner. And I don't know if they're doing deliveries related to that, but there seems to be a truck associated with them. Like, how else do you get the stuff in the cargo bike?
Right.
Like, they don't come through the Holland Tunnel.
No, I may have misspoken there. Obviously, most freight in New York City arrives by truck, but in terms of how they are then loaded and then distributed locally, rather than trucks making multiple stops, the cargo bikes are meant to reduce the impact of congestion by trucks, because these shorter deliveries can take place using the bikes. rather than the trucks moving locations and doing additional loading and unloading. There's a whole program that I'm hoping at some point we could have the Office of Freight and Mobility from the New York City DOT come and talk to us about some of their initiatives, including that. So that's something I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's my fault because I should come to transportation committee meetings, but I was going to say, if you're doing that, I'd love to talk and tell you my experience on First Avenue, because that's a whole nother animal between about 60th and 75, between the trucks, the cargo bikes, the bike lane, and the
Restaurant sheds?
no, well, not even that. Shall we say the sort of advisory opinion that the bikers take towards the bike lane, like, yeah, I should be in the bike lane. However, the light is turning red, and well, but I think that's for transportation.
That's a whole other thing.
And that
I
is
could
okay.
talk about it
I'm
all.
sure I'll get destroyed on Twitter just for saying that they rode out of the bike lane.
I could talk about it all night, but I sort of want to eat.
Okay,
Yeah,
and go, and we'll have, I haven't eaten either. So I have one more question for you, Craig. Have we talked about school buses and the academy buses that come from other schools to do things like sporting events or concerts, or they bring students in for chess meets, and versus the buses that are private school buses versus public school buses? I mean, are those go into the zone? Are they being treated the same or differently than other mass transit kinds of things?
I have no idea.
Well, I think
another question we have, I think we should also have a running list of questions if we, at whatever point in time the agencies involved in this come to the community board, that we have a set of questions that we're prepared to ask, that we've compiled over all of our meetings. And I think that is one that I hadn't thought about that is worth including on such a list.
Okay. So I guess with that, and rumbling stomachs all around, is there a motion to adjourn? Or are there any other questions or comments? Motion to adjourn. I think Michelle has her hand up.
So.
Any seconds? Do you see any, Craig? I don't know. Will, Zachary, weigh in here?
Billy raised.
Yeah,
Okay.
Billy just
You
gave
got a second from Billy. Craig?
I think we're ready to adjourn then.
I guess there's no old business, new business. So we'll see you next month.
All right. Have a
Need
good
a
night,
date.
everyone.
Okay. Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, Zachary.
Of course, anytime.
And Will, thank you.